Yeah, Temasek.
So, Samula, redo my speech again, okay? Don't like that.
Is it Temasek space now?
So that's what you told me.
Yeah.
I'm 65, younger than you, so my memory must be better, right?
No, I show you, I didn't read the thing.
Oh, your eyes are good, I don't wear glasses. You know, I love to come to Malaysia because everything starts late, right?
Don't insult.
No, don't you think it's very nice to live in a country
Computer is already starting.
Starting, yeah?
Okay, just
Okay.
start say something.
Hello, can cut right? Just sit down. Sorry,
Okay. We are, my name is Kang Wah Piao, organizer of this meeting, the moderator, and this meeting is organized by Monsoon's Book Club of London. I'm here to welcome the three speakers. The first speaker being Mr. Leong Si Hien, one of the very famous blogger and a familiar face at Hong Lim Park in Singapore. He is most currently facing a lawsuit by the Singapore Prime Minister, Mr. Lim Tien, a lawyer, member of the Middle Temple, is leader of People Voice in Singapore. And last but not least is Mr. Nazar of Singapore, an educationist and also one of the aspiring political team that hope to bring about a change in Singapore. The theme for today is, will the opposition in Singapore be able to make a serious breakthrough in the coming general elections? And may I now call upon Nazar to talk on the subject. Thank you.
Very good afternoon to all, ladies and gentlemen. Again, as I recall, as part of this team, I would like to thank the organizer of this team to have me in this group, in this meeting. Okay, let me start with this so-called why the Malays, it's always been in the sideline in Singapore, right? Okay, let me bring you all back to the history of Singapore and Malaysia, like so-called husband and wife, yeah, husband and wife. So during that times, if you can feel out, I think most of you will know about the history. Singapore actually, how Singapore earned their independence is that actually it's been kicked out from Malaysia, right? So why? At the time, UMNO was the government of Malaysia. So directly or indirectly, that's it in Singapore Malays in terms of the perspective of the right? As human, we have a witness. Even LKY also have a witness. It brings his emotional feelings against the Malays because of the UMNO, because of the Malaysia, right? Why I say that? The elements of vengeance inside the human is still there. The humans. So it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable, right? So what happened is that when he controls Singapore, there's a certain limit of the Malays to handle the government of Singapore. Once, if you look into it, the proof, or whatever I said today, most of you can just check it inside his book. The hard truth. You go to certain pages, he will talk about the Malays. He will talk about the Malays in the militaries. He will talk about the Malays inside the socials. He will talk about the Malays about education. Okay. About the militaries, it's clear cut. Not even one Malays in the fighter pilots. Not even one. Of today, not even one Malays itu added from the beginning until now. And now, after the Malays start to wake up, or maybe they have to stand up against certain policies of the government. So they put some Malays in the armed platoons, right? So that is one part of it. That in the military. Because why? The principle of LKY is very simple. If you give one rifle to the soldier in Singapore, will the soldier kill the Malaysian? Because most of the Malays have linked relationship in Malaysia. Like my example for myself, I have a family in Malaysia, in Johor, right? So that's the reason that he means there's a certain format that we don't meant to have that very high profile military Malays in Ministry of Defense. Okay, that's it. Very straightforward. In education, I think this is very interesting because we pay the school fees. We didn't pay the school fees because of the section of 152 and 153. All the native Singaporean will never have to pay the education fees, school fees. So what happened? They started to think about it. So when come to at the time when I was in 70s, early 70s, not now, but now it's about a few polytechnics in Singapore. So you can see about Malays increasingly in the polytechnics, but not in the university even. Because why? There's a certain word of open and closed inverted comma quota system. There is plus or minus, there is about 5% only. About 100 students in the university, only 5 Malays in the country entered in the university, studied in the university at the time. Because they don't want to see the Malays in whatever situation, whatever it is. So the career society. So a very clear cut. I give you a standard. You see in the Singapore government ministry, where else you can find the Malays? I still remember when our late Mr. Mansur Sukami, he was a graduate in economy, but ended up with a permanent secretary in the environment, Ministry of Environment. And now only one Malay minister in what? In environment, water environment, and that's it. Finish. Start with Malays in the Ministers of Social Welfare, Ahmad Mata. I still remember that. Ahmad Mata is the first minister of the Malays. They call it so-called Malays.
He was my lecturer.
Yeah.
At architecture school.
Yeah, Ahmad Mata. So he was elected and he made his Minister of Social Welfare at that time. Early 70s, I think. Late 60s and early 70s. So what happened if this is the case? Right? This element of human as human. We have to as Malays. And another point that we can see today, actually Malays in Singapore is like a punch bag. It's punch bag. Anything happen to Malay. Social sickness Malays. At that time when I still remember, early 70s, my groups of Malays, after finishing AGCO level, we never have been called up their national service. We don't know why until today. I just received when I was married in 1983, I received a green letter, a small green letter. You are exempted from national service. Don't know why, no reason. No reason at all. That's all, finish. You see, that's Malay in Singapore. That's why, even now, it's worse. After 9/11, what happened? Label, endor, pound, terrorists. It's happened in Singapore. This is what happened with I am a Malay in Singapore. I feel very, sad, no? It is sad in so that why always us as a small community, as a minority in our own country, like a second level citizen, no? They call it. So that is how we in Singapore today. So I make it short. If you guys really want to know about us, the reality, you can see the news. Today is how we open about this internet, in the Facebook, whatever. The so-called callings of the Malay community in Singapore, how they feel it. You can see the different of the comments for us. Totally different. Especially when it comes to that mentioning of the position of Malays. So when it comes to just recently, wow, Malays is very good. There is a national day rally. Always that it's a candy. It's candy for us. Candy for all the people of Singapore. Oh, Malays now is very good. They are increasing in education. There are now a lot of Malays professionals. Some kind of Malays of at least with the help of the government in terms what. You see, if you have to think about that, I myself, when I study, I take my degrees, I'll take even my family. I example my family. I'll never ask for government. I ask for the government, what happen? They will say, oh, my salary is the ceiling is limited. No, I reach the ceiling that I can't get the so-called facility for my children's education. And that's it. That is one example very straightforward. So, for today, why I'm standing here with Mr. Lim Jian and Mr. Lim Jian, it's not what happened. Maybe my involvement in the education as a lecturer in a foreign university. So maybe my comments in the FB, they called me to inquire why must I comment so harsh to the government or something like that. So I did that. I explained to them and they accepted it's good. But in one condition. Whether I would like to join totally in politics, yeah, or everywhere where I want to go, I have to be very careful in my rules. So that is Singapore. That is Singapore. Singapore is a very nice country. It's a very nice small island. That is BAP like that. Not Singapore. Singapore is very nice people. The hospitality is open to everyone else. So in terms of that I was the population of Malaysia 15%, you know what happened? They start off with the strategy and agenda of Stop at 2. The focus on Malays. Stop at 2. Right now, if you come into small Singaporean, we lack of population. The imports from other countries, especially SICA. But don't forget, before SICA, who else in Singapore they import? Philippines. So these Philippines, when they work too long in Singapore for 5 years or maybe more than that, they will apply for PR, right? At that time, Singapore is lesser. Singapore, Malay population decreased to the level of actually for the Malays also we can feel that. So what happened? The Filipinos they create the race of Malay in Singapore. That's PR, and some of them they will turn to citizenship. So this Filipinos is a Malay Singaporean in Singapore, and a few of them. And you can see this happen to our position of our president. Yeah, even the father is Indian, but they just change the constitution. Say right, okay, if you got a mixed blood of Indians, you got a mixed blood of Arabs, you got a mixed blood, you consider them you're Malay. And that's it. This is happening in Singapore. This is what happened in Singapore. So I thank you to all of that. I don't want to take your time. I want to give over to call Mr. Lim Kiat to continue whatever that we have, the optical engineering or whatever it is. But the main thing is that we have to work together to verify or clarify in terms of politics of Singapore today. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lim, right. Can you enlighten us on this question, which is that generally electorates will vote on issues of bread and butter, and in the case of Singapore, even if there's going to be an impending recession as in the past, they not necessarily respond by voting for opposition in such a crisis as in past elections. Why do you think that in the coming general elections and with the blooming economic trend, especially in the light of the US-China trade conflict, would it not make Singaporeans cling even more to the PAP in the coming elections than that they could make a bolder choice for parties like yours and the rest of the opposition coalition? Your strategy within them.
Thank you, Wah Biao. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you all for coming to listen to us. When Wah Biao suggested a public forum in Kuala Lumpur on this subject of whether the opposition in Singapore can finally make a breakthrough, I was most happy to accept his invitation to speak. He also knows that I am probably one of the most optimistic opposition figures in Singapore. I believe that we can make a breakthrough. I will give you my reasons shortly, but first of all, let me just say a little bit about my association with Wah Biao. I first saw him, I will not say I knew him, I first saw Wah Biao in 1989 in London. We were both members of the Middle Temple, one of the four so-called Inns of Court, which aspiring barristers had to belong to. And there's a tradition that you have to eat 24 dinners before you qualify as a barrister. So I saw Wah Biao often at those dinners. You know, he was already a very famous figure then. I was a timid Singaporean student, and I never picked up courage to go across to him and introduce myself. And it's funny how circumstances change, and now, 30 years later, you know, we have come together in this forum to speak about a subject which I know he's passionate about. We are all very passionate about. And of course, I must preface everything I have to say today by saying what a great inspiration the Malaysian example was a year ago, when Pakatan Harapan overthrew a government of 61 years and formed a new government. I think that experience spooked the PAP so much that when the 60th anniversary of them coming to power on the 30th of May this year, there was not a whimper from them. There was no celebration. Because I think they were hoping that people would not draw the parallel between UMNO at 61 and the PAP at 60. Now, let me come back to this question. Will the opposition make a breakthrough in Singapore in this general election? My answer to that question is, it depends on the opposition. It depends on the opposition. People will say, and you have this conversation all the time, Singaporeans are too scared. they fear too much. They think that if the opposition come to power, the country will fall apart. All that is a fallacy. That is a fallacy that has been promoted by the PAP and their gang of IB trolls. We call them internet brigade. Very much like what UMNO had in Malaysia. Pay people, to inundate social media with comments, very often pretending to be opposition supporters, but actually trying to mislead public perception. That is the PAP strategy. Now, there is no doubt in my mind, there is no doubt that Singaporeans are ready for change. And why do I say that? I do not just consider it from issues. I think it is wrong to look at elections as merely issue-driven. I like to take a broader perspective, a broader analysis. I think Singapore will change because the world is changing. Most importantly, the world is changing. What happened in 2016 in England with Brexit, and then in the United States with the advent of Bernie Sanders, Trump, and then you go back to England in 2017, the snap election, the rise of Corbyn, who almost toppled Theresa May. And then you go further and you examine what subsequently happened even in the German elections. And then, of course, you had the amazing 2018 general elections in Malaysia. And then, recently, of course, again in Taiwan. You see that the world is changing. And you will be daft or stupid to think that Singaporeans are that insulated, are that fearful. And there is a reason for this change. There is a reason for this change. There are political cycles as well. Between the 1930s, when we had the Great Depression in America, until the 1970s, the world was pretty much socialist democratic in political order, in political thinking. And then, of course, in the 70s, this political order got into problem, which is why in the US, you had very high inflation. In the UK, you had very high inflation. You had massive unemployment. And then there was an alternative waiting. And what was that alternative? That alternative appeared in two figures, most famously, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And they preached a different political theory, or what I call the neoliberal theory. It was about privatization. It was about the individual making good. It was about reducing the role of government. Everything was profit-driven. Everything was market-orientated. All right? Today, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, that political order is crumbling. Yeah. And why do we in 2016 see Brexit, see Bernie Sanders, see Corbyn? And ask yourself, I am old enough today to still remember Tun Mahathir when he first became Prime Minister in 1981. And I tell you, you may correct me, I think Tun Mahathir as a politician today is very different from the Tun Mahathir of 1981. His political ideology has changed completely. All right? Today, I may even term him as the as the Bernie Sanders of Malaysia, because his speech has changed completely. And so I think the world is going through a revolutionary change. And those who think that what happened in 2016 was an aberration, you are totally wrong. Because we are just seeing the start of the revolution. And what is that revolution? That revolution is people waking up to the fact that after 40 years of a political theory that says that you are on your own, money making is the most important thing in life, people are waking up to the fallacy of that argument. Singaporeans believed the PAP mantra for 40, 50 years that, look here, you leave the government to us, we will provide you with a good life, we will take care of you, all right? The state has no obligation to you. We can't go down the way of the Western governments because look at all of them. They are all going bankrupt. I remember Lee Kuan Yew telling the Singapore public all those things. And today, 40 years later, it is the Singapore people, not the Singapore government, that is going bankrupt. It is the government now that has $1.3 trillion in reserves, supposedly. But we have a society today where our old people have no retirement adequacy. None at all. CPF, which is the equivalent of your EPF, was promised to be returned at the age of 55. They kept dragging it on. Now at 65, you can start getting a monthly annuity. And then lately, they tried to hoodwink the people by pushing back that age to 70, all right? And they said, if you want it at 65, you've got to opt in. Why do I have to opt in when actually that is when it should have started? So you are hoping to catch people on the blind and make people give up their rights. And worst of all, that monthly annuity is stretched over a period of 28 years. So even if it starts at 65, you've got to live to 93 to collect your last payment. And if it starts at 70, you've got to live to 98 to collect your last payment. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And a recent NUS, a Lee Kuan Yew School of Public, no, I think it was an NUS study, I'm sorry, shows that the minimum sum required for a senior citizen in Singapore to live on is $1,380. But you know what's the average CPF payout a month? $355. $355. All right? $16 a day in the world's most expensive country. So, let me try and not digress too much and come back to this question. Yes, I am very, very hopeful, I am confident that the opposition are going to make a breakthrough this general election. But you know what is the biggest impediment of the opposition doing that? And since this forum is being live streamed, I take this opportunity to address my fellow opposition leaders in Singapore. It is because the opposition do not have the belief in themselves that they can lead. Our entire conversation has been taken up for 30 years by talk of how to make incremental changes. Win one seat here, win one GRC there. Political change does not happen like that. History has taught us that political change happens in a blink of an eye. It is not incremental. You look at what happened with the Berlin Wall. Who would imagine that in 1989, 1990, the Berlin Wall would come down, the Soviet Union would disintegrate? Who would imagine that in 1998, Suharto would fall in Indonesia? And let me remind people, 5 months before he fell, he had just won a 5th term as president of Indonesia. He was more powerful than ever. So you cannot dictate circumstances. Could you have imagined that last year, Pakatan Harapan would fall? Could you? No way. All right? So, to those people who say, oh no, the PAP is too entrenched, opposition too small, we can only hope to win a few more seats in the next general election and then build on that. I say that is why the opposition have always been crippled. Because if you do not have the courage and the vision to dream big, to achieve big, you will always be stuck. And tied to this is the idea, and they say, oh no, Singaporeans have a poor image of the opposition. You know why Singaporeans have a poor image of the opposition? Because for the last 40 years, no opposition leader has had the courage to tell Singaporeans, I want to be the next government. All right? I want to be the next government. I listened with amusement to what Goh Chok Tong said 2 nights ago at a gala dinner for the Chiam See Tong Sports Foundation. He had been invited as the guest of honor to speak, to raise funds for the Chiam See Tong Sports Foundation. And he said Chiam See Tong was a good opposition. You know, he had the interests of the people at heart. He never said that the PAP was a bad government. So in Goh Chok Tong's mind, he equates a good opposition with an opposition that does not think that the government is bad. And, you know, again, that is such an adulteration of what our democracy is meant to be. We have, in Malaysia, in Singapore, the Westminster model of democracy. With this model, it depends on the political parties confronting each other. Because we believe that out of this confrontation will come the best solution. And the people will choose that best solution. So I have no time. I have no time for arguments that Singapore is not big enough. One of our ministers, Ong Ye Kung, makes that argument. We cannot survive a two-party system. We cannot survive a multi-party system. That is nonsense. And that is what Lee Kuan Yew drummed into Singaporeans for 40 years. All right? Let me give you an example. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training and by profession. In court, that judge expects the two lawyers to fight it out to the best of their ability for the interest of the client. You are not expected to help the other lawyer. All right? You will be neglecting your duties to your client. And so similarly in a parliamentary democracy, it is not the duty of the opposition to help the government of the day. It is the duty of the opposition within reasonable bounds to oppose and to come up with their suggested solution. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest to you, the opposition have been shooting themselves in the foot for 30, 40 years. Because the subconscious message to Singaporeans is, we are not good enough. We are second fiddle. Yeah? We are just here to do check and balance on the government. You're not going to win anything. You're not going to make any major breakthrough if you don't tell Singaporeans, I want to be the government. And you know something, surprisingly? The opposition today, I will say this, without any hesitation, the opposition today are able to take over government because we have the worst government in Singapore history today. We do. We do. Tze Hien talked at length earlier about the statistics that show that 1 in 10 workers in Singapore earn $1,000 and less. And that is including CPF contributions. You take away the employee and employer CPF, which is 37%, and how much is that worker left with today? All right? $600 over. Yeah. We don't have a minimum wage. You know? They argue, the PAP says, oh, we can't have a minimum wage because that will lead to unemployment. Total nonsense. All right? Every major Asian country today has a minimum wage. And I would like to repeat again what Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that great American president, said at the height of the Depression in 1938 when he introduced the minimum wage in America. Those businesses that cannot afford to pay a minimum wage should not be in business. Should not be in business. And that is why today our economy is a low-wage, low-productivity economy. We have not lifted ourselves. Yes, we are rich, we are advanced, we are probably the richest Southeast Asian country. But honestly, we have not advanced. We see the other 8 ASEAN countries rising. The PAP are still sitting on their laurels. They think we are still light years ahead. I have lived in other ASEAN countries. I see an emerging young entrepreneurial class in Indonesia. I see that entrepreneurial class rising in Thailand as well as in Malaysia. It's all hot air and talk with the PAP. It is all hot air and talk. And why is there this lack of risk-taking, lack of entrepreneurship in Singapore? It is because the government controls 80% of the economy through the GLCs, all right? Government-linked companies. And so where is there the space for that private entrepreneur to venture, to make a successful business? So that model has to change. And the opposition now are putting forward great ideas. Not all the ideas yet, but you will see come nearer the election the vision that the opposition has. And you will see concomitantly the lack of ideas that the PAP has. And why is that? Why is that? I give you 2 answers for that. Number 1, the PAP have drawn their ranks from a very small group. Scholars, the elites. All right? Lee Kuan Yew was a believer in the elites. He transported a feudal imperial Chinese system into Singapore. He believed that the country should be governed by scholars. But today, the scholars may be great with academics, but they have got no real business experience in life. You know? They do not understand the difficulties that the businessman has to face. Yeah. Give you a classic example. At the National Day rally speech, Lee Hsien Loong said, oh, we are going to ensure CPF contributions for workers, older workers are going to be higher, so that they can be financially independent, in his words. Let me ask you, you take that $1,000 a month elder worker, you want to now increase his CPF contribution from 12% to 20%. That means every month he's going to have $80 less to spend. and his employer has to increase the employer's contribution from 14 to 17%. And he thinks, oh, it's increased cost. Why maybe do I not take a younger worker? So it's not having real life experience and not knowing what is the reality on the ground. And you have people like these making policies. And the second reason is very simple. The PAP are welded to a certain model that has not changed for the last 50 years. And that model is that there will be absolutely no welfare for the citizen of that country. You are on your own. That was a very seductive argument, first made by Lee Kuan Yew 40 years ago, 45 years ago. I still remember it. When he was castigating all the Western societies. Because to the PAP, if you give welfare to the people, you are encouraging sloth. You are encouraging laziness. But they have not evolved in their way of thinking. Why then is the government keeping so much money? We should be a nation where education is totally free. We should be a nation which can afford universal health care. But you know, we have $96 billion locked up in our MediSave that is supposed to provide you with the medical care you need in your life. But we have countless number of stories of people going to hospitals, all right, and having to lay out cash by the thousands of dollars. And they are in despair because they cannot find that cash. So, let me simplify my argument to a one-line. I think the opposition will have great success in this country because many Singaporeans now, and I know this because I talk to them every day, and I talk to everyone. Many Singaporeans now feel that Singapore is no longer alone. And I also allude to what Tze Hien said earlier in his speech. How can you have the feeling of home when 46% of the workforce is made up of foreigners? And you know what? Heng Swee Keat, whom the PAP have designated as the next leader, wants the population to be at 10 million. At 10 million. You tell me, at 5.8 million today, that indigenous Singaporean is only 3.5 million. And indigenous Singaporeans are not reproducing ourselves. We are not replacing ourselves. We have the second lowest fertility rate in the world at 1.1. Okay? You need 2 to replace yourself. When the population hits 10, can you imagine the number of foreigners to Singaporeans? I ask you to make your own calculation. And so I am happy. I am happy to allow the PAP to go and make arguments to Singaporeans, telling Singaporeans they must welcome foreigners. And you know something? That we must integrate with foreigners. Not foreigners integrate with us, we must integrate with foreigners. Which to me is one of the most ridiculous arguments ever. I still remember in 1986 when I was a student in England. And they were having similar problems with the South Asian immigrants. And there is this place in England called Bradford, just south of Manchester, which basically had become a Muslim enclave because there were so many immigrants from Pakistan, from India. and they were agitating for their own schools, for their schools to teach in Urdu. And I remember Margaret Thatcher made a very forceful speech. She stood up and she said, "You come to our country, you integrate with us, you learn our language, our lifestyle. We are not going to change you culturally, but if you want to be an English person holding an English passport, you jolly well integrate with our society." And so, ladies and gentlemen, you just have sometimes to go through some of the social media comments. Of course, you know, there's always a danger that we are living in an echo chamber, but I think you know how to filter it out. And you understand the anxiety of Singaporeans. You understand the anxiety of Singaporeans. And you know, people say, yes, the PAP will throw goodies and all that. I'm confident that when this level is reached, when Singaporeans no longer feel that their country is their home, there's very little you can do to try and buy their favor. But I also think, and this is where I think the Pakatan Harapan example is very relevant. The opposition in Singapore, in order to make the breakthrough, must come together. In July of last year, 7 political parties came together at the offices of the Singapore Democratic Party to discuss about an alliance, a coalition. I was the only opposition figure. I did not have a party then. I formed the People's Voice in October last year. I was the only opposition figure to issue a very strongly worded statement after that forum. In that statement, I gave my reasons why I think an alliance is imperative. And I would like to read that statement to you today. And that statement, incidentally, is reproduced in a recently published book by the Associate Professor of Political Science at NUS called Dalvir Singh. This is the book. Is the People's Action Party Here to Stay? All right, I think a very topical book in light of the impending general elections. And he reproduces in this book my statement. And I'm going to read, because what I said in that statement is still my firm belief today. This afternoon, at the premises of the SDP, various opposition parties came together to explore how we can cooperate for the greater interest of serving the people of Singapore. This is the statement I delivered at the meeting. On behalf of the party that I'm forming, People's Voice, I pledge our total commitment to the greater cooperation of the opposition parties in Singapore and to our common cause of displacing the PAP, which has been the government for 59 years. It is our hope that in the very near future, all the relevant opposition parties in Singapore will be able to join together in a real partnership and alliance. This would be in line with the fervent wishes of a great many Singaporeans. As politicians, we have the solemn duty to listen to the people whom we ask for the chance to serve. On our own, each of our parties may not have the numbers to dislodge the PAP from its present position. But if we are joined in a great and common venture, we will have the ability to do so. However, we must be real partners, and not in name only. We must realize that in such an alliance and partnership, the problems of my alliance members are also my party's problems, and that our future are inextricably tied to one another. Our alliance must strive to form the next government in the upcoming general elections. We must offer real change to better the lives of Singaporeans. We must be a real alternative. We have a convincing message to Singaporeans that this is the worst government in our nation's history and that it must be removed. The message that the opposition should be voted into Parliament to be a check and balance on the government is no longer relevant or enough. Unfortunately, this was always the message by the opposition in the past, and that relegated the opposition to be second best. Voters have no desire to vote for second best. We have no time for futile concepts such as not contesting all seats and have the PAP return to power on nomination day, the so-called by-election effect. If we continue to allow such self-defeatist concepts to fester, we will always be vulnerable to the fear-mongering of the PAP, warning voters that they may lose power. Such fear-mongering was highly effective in GE15 and was a major factor in the big win for the PAP. The winds of change are here and they have buffeted the world for the past 2 years. It is a global win as seen in the phenomena of Brexit, Bernie Sanders, Trump, Corbyn, and now Pakatan Harapan. Those who try to suggest that what happened in the West and now Malaysia cannot possibly happen in Singapore are myopic and in denial, because they refuse to recognize that the winds of change originate from people's wariness with the neoliberal economic order, which has been dominant for the last 40 years. It was a reckless experiment where making the rich richer did not have the desired trickle-down effect and led instead to the impoverishment of a great many in our society. The PAP were already practicing neoliberalism even before it became the trend. We in the opposition must set our sails to catch this wind of change and bring hope and a better life to our citizens. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to my opposition colleagues listening in Singapore, I say this with the greatest conviction and the greatest sincerity. The opposition must come together in an alliance for the upcoming general elections. I was very pleased that at the launch of this party on the 3rd of August, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock said that he hoped that a loose alliance, a loose coalition can still come around. I was also very heartened that about a week to 10 days ago, Dr. Chee Soon Juan of the Singapore Democratic Party also expressed the wish that the opposition parties would come together. He said they must come together for us to have a chance to make that breakthrough. I add my voice to that, and I would ask for all the relevant opposition parties in Singapore to come together to fight the PAP this coming election. I have no doubt, if we do that, we will see a major success. And we will see the breakthrough that so many Singaporeans have wished for many years. And in conclusion, I say this. For the first time in 60 years, the PAP have lost the battle of ideas. Whether it is on healthcare, on housing, on CPF, on jobs, the PAP have lost the battle of ideas. And I want to quote a very famous British politician. His name is Nigel Lawson. He was the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer under Margaret Thatcher. And in 1992, on the eve of the British general elections, he gave an interview to the BBC. And at that time, it was projected by all the pundits. The pundits always get it wrong, all right? The pundits always get it wrong. It was projected by all the pundits that Labour under Neil Kinnock would sweep into power. But Nigel Lawson told the BBC, no, the Conservatives will still win the next election because we have won the battle of ideas. And what did he mean by that? What he meant was that after 11 years of Thatcherism, the British people had come to accept that everyone must have their own home. That the economy could not be stifled, could not be obstructed by strikes like the miners' strikes. That there had to be privatization of the national industries. But today, 30 years later, the world has changed. Today, we have seen that Thatcherism, Reaganism, state capitalism, which PAP practices, in which the role of the state is enhanced, but the role of the individual is diminished. It has not worked for Singaporeans. It has led most of our people into financial difficulties and worries for their old age. So let us take heart. Let us believe that if we come together and we fight the good fight, we will have great success. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So, Wapiao, I hope I have answered your question adequately
and eloquently. Right, before I open the session for questions and answers, I have a question for Mr. Leong, in that in the battle for ideas and with the new opposition challenge, the PAP, and to win over the Singapore voters, you need to have a dream. You need to have a dream that's something Singaporeans are familiar with, even the context and texture of such dream. Now, one of the failed dream of the PAP was articulated a few decades ago by Goh Chok Tong about achieving a Swiss lifestyle. Has that Swiss lifestyle been achieved? And if not, would that be a dream that is achievable from your mastering all the statistics? And if it's achievable, would it not be an ideal target for opposition to sell to the population?
The answer is no. The dream that Singaporeans will see come true one day is that we will no longer be the only country in the world whereby the government makes money from CPF, pensions, HDB, public housing, and healthcare. From a cash flow perspective, we're the only country in the world where the government makes money from CPF, HDB, and healthcare. So the day will come where this dream will come true for all Singaporeans, that we'll get rid of this government. Because when you have a government that doesn't spend any money from a cash flow perspective on these three items, what do I mean by don't spend any money from a cash flow perspective? Every year, the inflows to CPF exceed the outflows to government. Every year, the inflows to public housing exceed the outflows of government. Every year, the inflows to healthcare exceeds the outflows of healthcare. So we are unique. And Wapiao, the Swiss standard of the dream has now become a nightmare. The numbers are so bad. LinkedIn has given you some of them. Let me give you some more. 46% of the workforce are non-Singaporean. We're not even counting the about 20,000 new citizens that are granted every year who are working. If you include all this, perhaps almost as much as half the workforce are not true blue Singaporeans. In the first quarter of this year, unemployment of Singaporeans went up, unemployment of foreigners went down, unemployment of permanent residents came down. Now, LinkedIn mentioned about 1 in 10 Singaporean workers, the income is less than 1,000 a month. Now, this 1,000 is what we call including the employee CPF contribution of up to 20%. About 2 in 10 Singaporean workers earn less than 1,500. 3 in 10 less than 2,000. 4 in 10 less than 3,000. For the 6th consecutive year, the most expensive city in the world, and the wages are so low. Now, if you are in Malaysia, everything is very cheap, then low wages is not an issue, right? But look at Singapore. Total household income below 1,000. 54% of these households actually spend more than what they earn. Households below 2,000, 31% actually spend more than what they earn. Now, if you dig into the statistics, it's much worse because the household statistics are different from the income statistics. The income statistics is only including employees' CPF of up to 20%. But the household statistics includes the employer contribution of up to 17% as well. So when you look at 1,000, you go less 31%. Right? That means the household that's getting actual disposable cash income of 600 plus, 54% of them are spending more than $1,000. How do they survive? So, Bapiao, the dream will come. There will be a breakthrough because the war cry of the opposition and all Singaporeans will be stop making money on CPF, HDB and healthcare and jobs for Singaporeans.
Right. If I can just add to what Tze Hien just said, we don't mind if there is a situation where there are too many jobs to fill in Singapore and Singaporeans cannot fill those jobs and they have to be filled by foreigners. But we have a situation now in Singapore where foreigners are taking away jobs from Singaporeans because the foreign labor is much cheaper than Singapore labor. And you know, what is the consequence? What is the sad consequence? The sad consequence is now when you order a Grab or a Gojek, there is a high chance that that driver is a very young driver. Tze Hien, who is a great resource for statistics, gave me the statistics the other day. 16% of our Grab and Gojek drivers are age 30 and below. What does that show? It shows you that we are having a whole generation of young Singaporeans now who finish their studies, come out, and there's no work, there's no job. And I've encountered so many on our walkabouts. Parents coming up to me. There was even a parent a few years ago who said, my son had a first-class degree, but he can't get work. He can't get work. All right? And our labor laws are like leaking holes, you know? I mean, we do not have stringent oversight of how employers employ Singaporeans. I mean, there is no country in the world like Singapore. You can come into Singapore as a tourist and get a job. Yeah? You are not going to be able to do that in America, Australia, Canada. You're not going to be able to do that in Malaysia. Because the role of every government, and this is the only role which I attribute to government, the role of government is to protect the interests of that citizen, ensure the safety of that citizen. We are having a government that does not do that. That is totally profit-driven at the end of the day. Why? Because 80% of the economy is controlled by them. And the cheaper the labor, the better for them. No minimum wage, superb for them.
And if I may add to what Lim Tian has added for you, if you are a Singaporean lady, you get pregnant, that's 4 months maternity leave. If you are a foreign lady under a work permit, the terms of the work permit says you cannot get pregnant. So, is there any wonder that Singaporeans are not being employed, are being discriminated? You employ a Singaporean male. He has 40 days of national service liability. You employ a foreign male, don't have this problem. You employ a foreigner, the employer does not have to contribute CPF. He saves up to 17%. You employ a Singaporean, male or female or whatever, the employer has to contribute up to 70%. And the best part is, most of the lower income foreign workers are on a 2-year contract. They can't just jump to another employer if they're unhappy or if the employer is torturing them, making them work 12 hours every day without rest. They have no choice. They're stuck with the same employer. And that's why the playing field is not level for the Singaporean.
Right. Any questions from the floor?
Hi, thanks. Just a quick question about the opposition landscape in Singapore. Because some countries, sometimes opposition people, they hate each other more than they hate the government. So maybe, also after that, maybe you can tell us what's the recent baggage, the challenges, with the fragmentation, things like that. What that experience has been like and what might be changing going forward. Because it seems we have parties, a lot of different people who want to do different things. How's that coming along?
Maybe I can start.
And also, sorry, just one quick addendum to that, slightly unrelated, is maybe your views on like death penalty in Singapore for drug-related offences.
Yeah, maybe I take the lead in answering that. First of all, I would say this. I will not answer that part about the death penalty. All right, I have, that does not rank as one of my top priorities. I have to be very honest on that. I am a lawyer. I know the laws of my country. I have certain views of the death penalty. I think you need to get into government first before you can make any changes. All right? I know the pros and cons of those arguments, whether the death penalty at the end of the day is a good deterrent. But let me come to that part, and that is the part which I want to answer, which is this so-called fragmentation amongst the opposition, which people talk about incessantly. I will say this. I think that is a PAP narrative. It is a deliberately calculated narrative to discredit the opposition. And as for the fact that there are many opposition parties in Singapore, and today there are 12. Mine was the 11th form, and Dr. Tan Cheng Bock recently formed the 12th, the Progress Singapore Party. But I will say this. Out of these 12, many of the parties are not active. They are not active. This coming GE will show you who the serious players are in the field. And of course, you have to do work in between elections. John Howard, the former Australian Prime Minister, and he won 4 terms as Prime Minister, had a very famous saying. He said, I hope I'm not being offensive to my Muslim friends here. Yeah? He said, you can't fatten the pig on market day. You can't come out 2 weeks or 1 month before elections, start campaigning and think that you're going to make any headway. That is physically impossible. No political party has done that in history. And as for these differences in the opposition, again, a PAP-led narrative to sow discord and discredit the opposition. As Dr. Chee Soon Juan said about 10 days ago, the differences in the opposition ranks, the differences in our platform, our policies are minuscule. All the opposition parties believe in minimum wage, for example. I think they do. There may be 1 or 2 who are exceptional. But that does not mean that we cannot reconcile our differences. The commonalities far outweigh the differences. And the other thing is this. I come back to the subject of too many parties. And this is something I believe in fervently as well. You know, this concept of a two-party system, which many people talk about, which a lot of Singaporeans talk about, is just not realistic anymore in the modern world. Even if you look at the House of Commons in England today, and England being the mother of all democracies, they don't have a two-party system. Yes, they have the Conservatives and they have the major opposition who are the official opposition. But they have the Scottish Nationals, they have the Lib Dems, and they have maybe the Green Party and all that. You look at Germany, you look at some of the most advanced Nordic countries, like Sweden. These are all multi-party parliaments. And the modern world demands that because we don't have similar views on everything. And it does not mean that coalition governments cannot work. You look at Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. She's had a coalition government for years. The Germans don't have a two-party system, all right? They have coalition partners. And the classic example always is Israel. They say the Israeli government is so chaotic. There are so many parties in there. You have the far right, you have, Likud, and then you have Labour. They're always in chaos. But so what? So what? Israel is a population about the size of Singapore. And yet today, Israel is such an innovative, enterprising country. You look at the NASDAQ, the second board in the US, there are more Israeli companies on that board than all the other American, British, whatever German companies combined. It does not mean that differences in political opinion will render a government helpless, a country ungovernable. That is a totally fallacious argument.
Thank you. Just add, I have been helping practically all the opposition parties for 20 years, analyzing the statistics. I only entered politics in April, that's 4 months ago. And these brief 4 months, I find that all the opposition are very cooperative. They don't have much differences, and they will all be in alliance. So like Linton said, all this is propaganda. Right?
Right, any further questions? Yes, please.
Assuming the coalition government is a coming venture in Singapore, who do you think will be the leader?
I think that is a very difficult question to answer. That is a very, very difficult question to answer. I think the most practical answer would be the party that has the most number of seats in the opposition. Naturally, the leader of that party should have the first right to the prime ministership of the country. I think that is only right. Yeah. For example, when the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats formed a coalition government in Britain in 2010, after a so-called hung parliament, it was David Cameron, the leader of the Conservatives, who became the Prime Minister, because obviously the Conservatives had far more MPs than the Lib Dems. But that is not necessarily so, because Pakatan Harapan's example is a classic example. I think Tun Mahathir's party is actually the smallest party in that alliance. Yeah, it's that smallest party in that alliance, but yet they recognize Tun Mahathir as the leader. And there was a pact made that if the opposition were to come to power, he would be the prime minister. So it is all based, it is going to be based on agreement. It is going to be based on agreement. But I want to add one other thing. In Singapore, ever since Pakatan Harapan's victory, Many Singaporeans have said, oh, you must do this because this is what Pakatan Harapan did. My answer to that is, every country is different. Every campaign is different. You are not going to have the same playbook for every campaign. All right? It doesn't mean that we have to follow Pakatan Harapan's example to the T to be able to succeed. I do not believe in that. But I think what was important of the Pakatan Harapan experience is that it was such a revelation, it was such a revolution. It showed Malaysians, and I think it has shown many Singaporeans, that it is possible to displace the PAP. I think that is the most useful lesson.
If I may just add, in the last election, 2015, the law was changed. Nobody who is a candidate or a central executive committee member of a party can speak at anyone else's rally. So you will never have a case like Malaysia where you have different people speaking together. The law has been changed. And I think the important question is not so much who is going to be Prime Minister, who are going to be ministers. The most important question is we must stop this government from making money on CPF, HDB, and healthcare. After that, then your question comes in. But that is the one question.
Why does the Singapore government want to make so much money?
You have to ask them.
Those TSA doesn't belong to them privately.
After analyzing for statistics for 20 years, writing thousands of articles, this is one that I don't know. I don't understand. Yeah.
You see, the situation has become so ridiculous that a few years ago, a nominated member of parliament claimed in parliament that the CPF money was not the people's money. All right, there was a huge uproar. And then recently, there was an article that appeared in the newspapers which seemed to suggest going back again to that line of argument. This time they don't make it so blatant. They said, oh, the CPF is a common pool for people to get insurance on things like health and other things. You know, so you are going to have attempts all the time to try and tell the Singaporeans that CPF is not their money. You know, because by right, if CPF is their money, they should be able to demand for it back anytime when they reach 55, which was the original promise. Here in Malaysia, you get your EPF back at 55, don't you?
60 now.
Now 60, okay. But your returns are at 6 to 7%, whereas in Singapore, we have been stuck at 2.5% for the last 20 years.
You know, every year, the contributions to CPF exceed the withdrawals. Every year. We estimate the government makes about $6 billion a year just from the difference in the return that they derive from investing our CPF and the interest that they pay to us. And Singapore has the highest surpluses per capita on the average every year of the whole world. The highest average surplus per capita. So your question is the best question of the day. Why do they keep having to accumulate reserve to 1.3 trillion? Keep making money on everything. Why?
You know, spending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question.
Let's have a question from Lady.
Sir,
Gender equality.
as an opposition member, what do you think, what would be a strategy for you to bring the Singaporeans together and come out and vote for the opposition party? Like for Malaysia, last year, the general election, you know, our Pakatan Harapan actually came out and said that, okay, we have all these manifestos, these are the things that we're going to change. Are there anything going on within this, you know, this kind of manifestos or whatsoever that will give confidence in Singaporeans to come out and vote?
That is a great question. I thank you for that. I know that in Pakatan Harapan's case, there was a common manifesto, there was a common logo, although that was not decided till the very last minute. And actually 3 months before the alliance got going, you would have thought that the alliance was going to fall apart, right, 3 months before the elections. But it was a great tribute to the members of Pakatan Harapan that they stayed together, they fought through, and they won. My honest answer to you is, I think the best scenario for the Singapore opposition going forward is a so-called loose alliance, which has been voiced by Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, and was voiced by me even last year when I came out with that statement. I never for 1 minute thought that there could be anything more than a loose alliance. And why should that be? Why should that be? Unfortunately, a lot of Singaporeans have this concept, oh, you must all merge into a unified party. That is not possible. That is not desirable. That is not desirable. And even Pakatan Harapan didn't amount to that. Pakatan Harapan was an alliance of 4 parties. You had a common manifesto. I think in Singapore what we can have is an alliance of issues. What we can come together and agree on certain fundamental issues, which as a government we will tackle. All right? And you know, what are the most important issues in Singapore today? They are not difficult to hazard. It's healthcare, it is jobs, it is housing, it is CPF. If you can, and we in the opposition are well capable of coming together on a common platform for these 4 issues. And these 4 issues would accord with the wishes, and I'm not exaggerating here, would accord with the wishes of 80% of the population. So the impetus is for us to do it. And you may ask me a follow-up question and say, really, you say 8%? But in the 2015 GE, 70% of Singaporeans voted for the PAP. My answer to you would be, I don't even take the 2015 GE into consideration. Because to me, that was a total aberration. Because that was a GE that followed very quickly after Lee Kuan Yew's death. And it was a GE in which basically the people were giving their gratitude to the first Prime Minister of independent Singapore. I think 4 years down the road, and after all the disastrous policies we have seen in these 4 years, they have had enough. And I've had so many Singaporeans come up to me and say, you know something, I really regret voting for the PAP the last time. I voted because I was grateful to that old man. I will never vote for them again. You know, that is the reality on the ground, and I'm conveying to you what I'm hearing on the ground.
In my view, the strategy is simple. When the government stops making money on CPF, HDM healthcare, the mother of most of the problems that Singaporeans have today will slowly go away. And we are confident that we will gradually make the changes that will unravel the mess that the PAP government has created for Singaporeans.
You know, actually, I just want to add one final word. Actually, if you look at the electoral landscape in Singapore today, I say this, the opposition are actually in a very good position. I would say that at the last election, the solid opposition bloc was 30%. I think today, the solid opposition bloc is probably about 35% of the voters. The PAP, I acknowledge, have a very solid bloc of voters, which is between 35 to 30%. I think nearer to 30% today, after their disastrous 4 years of government. You are looking at a section of voters of about 30% who will decide this coming election. I keep telling my opposition colleagues, we got to go out and find those extra 15%, you know, to win. So we are not starting from zero. That is what many people do not understand. The opposition is not starting from zero. The opposition today is starting from 35%.
See, the time bomb that is going to make the breakthrough is our public housing, our HDB. Because after decades of the government telling Singaporeans that your HDB is an asset, it's an asset enhancement policy. It will help you to grow your wealth and then you will retire. All of a sudden, 2 years ago, the minister reminded all Singaporeans, oh, you know your lease is only for 99 years. And so after 99 years, your house becomes worthless. And all the CPF and cash you have used to pay for your house will go up in smoke. And so what's happening now in Singapore is, if your flat is more than 40 years old, the price starts to go down, right? Because people are worried about buying older flats.
Of course, get loan.
Yeah, of course, there's some restriction on the use of CPF and loans for older HDB flats, which the government has just announced they will relax. Now, I cannot understand how any government will solve a problem by making the problem even bigger. Now imagine you restrict my use of CPF or loan, so I have problem buying older flats, right? And now you say I can use more of my CPF to buy it. Then more of my CPF disappears into thin air at the end of the day. How is that solving the problem? So this one will be a major breakthrough. All the Singaporeans, 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing. They're all sitting on a time bomb that's waiting to explode. And the only way to make the bomb not explode is to vote for the opposition.
Yes. Is this a universal basic income an issue in Singapore? Universal basic income.
It is not an issue in Singapore at the moment.
Why not?
I know that it is becoming a more and more important issue. It is certainly one of the main points being pushed by this person by the name of Andrew Yang, who is a candidate in the US presidential elections, the only American Chinese. And it is an idea that has been advocated by a lot of entrepreneurs, even one of the co-founders of Facebook. And it is certainly, it has been done successfully in certain countries. Lee Hsien Loong said earlier this year or last year, I can't remember now, he said, he pointed to one example and he says, oh, the experiments there have failed, and so it's not something that we should think about at this point in time. But there will come a point in time where we have to seriously consider the issue of universal basic income, and especially for Singapore.
Yeah, because you have
Why? Because in Singapore, many of the older workers have no CPF because they were so badly paid in their younger days. They don't have CPF, or CPF was not an element, and so today they don't have CPF. But are you going to say that these people should live in poverty forever, should not have a decent life? A lot of very renowned and learned economists in Singapore, and I can cite you one of them. His name is Yeoh Lam Keong, who was the former chief economist of the GIC. He has profiled, the misery of the poor and the low-wage workers in Singapore. And he has said for many years now, we can afford it because it will only take up a very little percentage of our GDP. You should give $500 to all elderly people, and that will solve a lot of their living problems. I think it is an issue that any incoming non-PAP government must seriously consider.
Because you have accumulated all the wealth.
Yes.
You do that.
Yes. There's no use in saying, oh, we acknowledge your contribution as a pioneer of Merdeka generation, when you are not allowing these people to lead a decent life.
Let me try to answer your question from a different perspective. We have an estimated 1.3 trillion in the reserves.
Yeah.
even conservatively, you say 5% return, that's $65 billion a year, of which now the government is using about 15 billion in the net investment return contribution. So 32 point, even you use half of the 5%,
It's
65, it's 32.5 billion. Minus the 15 billion they're using now, you got another 17.5 billion. You can do wonders with 17.5 billion, and that's only half of, say, a conservative return of 5% of the estimated resource.
No. You can easily do that actually.
Mr. Wu, you have a question?
Yeah, I think in all the past elections, you look at in Singapore, the opposition rallies has always been very well attended. So I think I tend to think that people are curious because of the control of the media and also the draconian laws we have. Yeah. So now I think Mr. Lee has been talking about fattening the pig all along. So I just like maybe you can share with us how you fatten the pig all along.
I think the opposition must be serious about getting our message out. The problem with the opposition in Singapore, as you know, our state media, our newspapers are all controlled. It's a state media. They don't give any columns and inches to the opposition, maybe except for occasionally the Workers' Party, which is the only opposition party with any seats in parliament. But I tell people, we now have social media. We should be using social media to the hilt. And you know something, more and more Singaporeans don't rely on state media, which is why their revenue is plunging every quarter. SPH, Singapore Press Holdings, is the worst performing stock on the Singapore Stock Exchange today. All right? It's because they can't sell newspapers. They have transformed themselves into a property-owning company. They are into things like nursing homes, you know? This is for a media company, but it is only a matter of time before, I tell you, the state media becomes irrelevant. But of course, that is how the government wants to play it. They use state media. So for the opposition, with no access to state media, your only alternative really is social media. But I am glad to say this. It was a big factor in Pakatan Harapan's win in 2018 because social media is so intensive in Malaysia. But even in Singapore, 79% of our population have access to social media. I recently attended another seminar where the lady told me something astounding. She said, no, the percentage is actually 89%. So you are talking about really only a very small percentage of the population who do not have access to social media. So I think really, you know, the answer is clear. I mean, for the opposition, it is by way of social media. And why do you think the PAP came out with this law called Prevention of Online Falsehoods? Here in Malaysia, they are getting rid of what Najib introduced. But there in Singapore, we are introducing what Najib introduced and even worse.
You see, the government is shooting themselves in the foot in this regard. When you have a fake news law, that becomes the most famous fake news law in the world. You know, any minister can determine what is fake news. Any minister, government minister, education minister, he can determine what is fake news. And the penalty is up to 10 years jail and $1 million fine. So the government is shooting themselves in the foot every day. All the Singaporeans are asking, hey, why is the government so scared? You know, last year, November 19, on the same day, they charged 2 bloggers for criminal defamation. They sued one website for defamation. They tried to serve a writ of summons on me for defamation. And the Prime Minister's brother's wife, around the same time, right, received a 500-page complaint, right, about misconduct to the Law Society. All happening around the same day. So Singaporeans are saying, wow, this is like December 7, 1941, a day which will live in infamy. And why is the government so scared? Why do they need to clamp down on so many people? Right? Why do we need a fake news law? So it's very good for us. They are doing the job for us. You see, when I don't even know this Chinese saying, when the emperor becomes oppressive, he loses the mandate of heaven. So history tells you, the more oppressive a government becomes, the more desperate become, the more scared become, the breakthrough will come.
Now, how you might be able to convince the squeezed middle class, but how do you get your message through to the poorer section of the population who are receiving welfare or help one way or another from the government? And given the mentality, the subject mentality of the Singapore electorate, they are almost the safe vote bank for government. That includes the Malay voters and the poorest. How do you intend to reach out to them? And that would be probably 10%.
Actually, the government is doing it for us. I tell you why. For the first time, a few months ago, the government released what we call the social welfare detailed statistics. First, I give you the ballpark statistics. Every year, we have our social welfare scheme is called ComCare. Last year, it gave out $130 million to more than 80,000 beneficiaries. You go and divide 130 million by 81,000, right? You can see it's not a lot of money, right?
How much?
Maybe, I don't know, 200 plus a month, average.
Yes,
Okay.
But
So you see, the government is shooting themselves in the foot every day. Now, when they released the detailed statistics, it was even worse. This was what was told in Parliament. On the average, okay, the assistance, right, only lasts for like maybe 12 months. And of those who reapply, about 25% managed to get it again. And it took on the average about 12 months to get it. You know what that tells you, right? The poor, the lower income. First, you have to jump through all the, means testing, must supply the income of your family members, everything, right? Then you have managed to jump through all the hoops, then you get some money, but the money is only for 3 months, 6 months, the review, right? And it has to stop after a while, and then you have to reapply, and then you wait to reapply. And look, when this was disclosed, we were all actually very happy in the Waka, right? It's crazy, right? You get so little, and you have to, go through all these hoops to get it, and to keep jumping on new hoops again to get them. In Singapore social welfare system, there are only about 5,000 people who are permanent recipients of social welfare. Permanent meaning they must show that they are destitute and have no family members who can help them at all. So you have about 5,000. The other 70,000 I mentioned, 81,000 beneficiaries, right? The other 60 plus thousand or 7,000 is all what they call short-term and medium-term assistance. So you are always under this constant fear that when it comes for my review, am I going to pass again now? And if not, how long I have to wait? If I give an example. You need to provide the income of all your immediate family. Let's say Linton is my brother. For some reason, he doesn't want to, give me his income. Then that box is not checked. Then that's the end. So, your question is very good. Why the government needs to accumulate so much money? But by the same token, why do you have to make it so difficult to give the poor people so little money only for such a short time?
Yes, sir. You'd like to comment on that? How do we get the votes out from the poorest?
So this is case of most of these Malays. Because for Malays in Singapore, if you see the statistics on Malays in terms of careers or jobs, they are more to lower income groups. Yeah. So what else they want to seek? They always seek about this to request help from certain, they call it service development, family development service. Yeah, to get some certain cash or something to help them to survive in that manner. So, but in terms of that, it's really ridiculous. I mean, they still want to know more about the income ceilings, how much you earn, and how many your family is earning. You know, so at a certain stage or at a certain level, there's an income ceiling. Or let's say, if your income over 700 and below, and below, then you can apply for it. You just imagine, minimum earnings of Singapore now, even is for the cleaners, minimum is about maybe about $700 or $800 per month. So one person earns is covered for, is covered already is so-called reach the ceiling. So how is that they want to give the help to us, the assistance to them? Then there's no way. So that's what our Mr. Lin saying just now, Mr. Liao saying just now. That it's not easy to get the help. It's not easy. There's always the ceiling there. It's always the ceiling in terms of assistance in social, in family, in monthly, education, in health. In health, I'll give you an example, especially when you have to use this our CPF. What is it doing? If I myself, I experienced it. I was ordered for 4 days in the hospital, so I had to pay about 1,300. Alright. So after they look into my CPF account, medicine around or whatever it is. So I have to they deduct $1,000 and still I have to pay $300 in cash. It insists to pay 1,300 in cash. And I told them that, I told them directly that, hey, in my medicine in my account, how can I get this? How am I going to use it? When will you? No, this is policy of the government. You will still have to pay about 20% of your, the total of your charges. So, at the end of the day, when you see the receipt from this so-called, if you go to check up or monthly in clinics, the subsidy that we receive for the healthcare is deducted from what? From the total of the GST. Can you imagine that? You get what I mean? The total of the charges, then that including the GST, right? Right? So subsidy from government deduct the subsidy, the total of the GST. So at the end of the day, you still have to pay.
Let me give you some interesting statistics. Households.
Let's take some more questions before we get.
Okay.
Drown in statistics.
It's okay, 1 minute.
Okay.
Sure, 1 minute. Households staying in 1 and 2 room flats. All the races less over the years. Only one race gradually increased. You go to the public hospital, if you are referred by a private clinic, you're not allowed to go to the lower class C or E2. You must go to class A or E1. You must have a referral from a public poly or clinic. And the last time, I think the question was asked, after a person going to a higher class ward and find they cannot afford it and want to downgrade, how many were able to downgrade after going through means testing? The success rate was 1%. And the example Nasir gave you, right? Oh, you have exhausted what they call your MediSave withdrawal limits and your MediSave eligibility limits. I mean, you still have money inside, but cannot use because they have limits for withdrawal, limits for eligibility. Then you die in the hospital. Too bad. Because if you die in the hospital, they can take the remainder of your MediSave, even though you have already exhausted your limits. But if you go home and die, they can't take it from you. You see how ridiculous a country Singapore has become, where deciding whether to die in hospital or not to die can mean that, look, imagine if I have 50,000 in my MediSave, exceeded the eligibility and withdrawal limit. I die in hospital, I owe the hospital 50,000, they take off. I know I insist I go home and die, I'm a poor family, my beneficiary get 50,000. What kind of country are we living in? Should I have been through?
You need a PhD to navigate through the Singapore
Yeah, permanent head damage, right? We want to navigate our healthcare, our public housing, our CPF system. You know, it's crazy. You know, CPF system, right? Look, you get interest. Then under the CPF Standard Life Scheme, when you die, all accumulated interest from age 65 is eaten up by the fund. In other words, from 65 onwards, whatever interest you earn when you die is gone now.
Okay, your 1 minute is up.
Thank you. So in Malaysia, right, the politics is driven a lot by the dynamics relationship between the political parties and the leaders. If you don't follow the news every day, you don't necessarily see all the nuance and all the little things. So maybe you can help give us some insight or just your personal views. You mentioned that there are only a few serious players. So what are the relationships, the dynamics between these few serious players? How's that coming along, and whether there's a chance for an electoral pact regarding contesting all the seats and one-to-one fights and things like that. And also maybe a little bit about what your views on the youth attitudes towards politics, how is that changing in Singapore?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. That's a brilliant question. But before I answer that question, can I just come back to Wah Piao's question again, which I think is a great question. I just want to give me 1 minute on that. I accept as a fact that the low-income group are a mainstay of the PAP's power. That is the dilemma in Singapore today, I'm telling you. The low-income are not being well looked after by the government, but they dare not let go because they think that if they vote for the opposition, the little bit that they get from government will be withdrawn or lost. And so, election after election, they vote the PAP. But I say, this is also where the opposition has failed miserably in the past. Because if you do not put yourself forward as capable of forming the government, as wanting to form the government, these people are not going to go with you. You've got to tell people, I want to form the government, I have the ability, and I have the policies to help you move up in life before you can persuade these people to come with you. That is the dilemma. Lee Kuan Yew once said, the backbone of the PAP support is the middle class. Once we lose the middle class, we are in trouble. I think today, the middle class, a large part of them, are not with the PAP. But it is the lower income groups that I acknowledge that still do support the PAP. Coming back to your question about this working together of the opposition, I'm very confident that in this election, you will see every seat contested. Actually, that happened in 2015. And that actually also happened in 2011, if not for the fact that one GRC team contesting Tanjong Pagar, which was Lee Kuan Yew's ward, and he was still alive there, was disqualified because they were 30 seconds late into the nomination. And they said that they were actually impeded by the authorities, by certain authorities, I don't want to name the names, from getting there. So I have no doubt that all the seats are going to be contested, and I'm happy, and that should be the way. That should be the way. As for the electoral pact, I am still very hopeful that that will come. I take a lot of heart from the fact that Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, Dr. Chee Soon Juan have spoken about that recently. My own sense is that something will come about. Something will come about. And, you know, you can see, if you follow social media in Singapore today, you can see which are the political parties that are active, that are actually doing groundwork, that are going to the ground. And I'm happy to say that People's Voice is actually one of those parties, you know. And it is my hope that, you know, the more serious parties that are doing work, that are actually thinking of how to come up with winning strategies will come together. And, you know, the other opposition parties that are not so serious we can still band together, all right? But they will have to take a lesser role. They will have to take a lesser role, you know? And the PAP and their supporters always say, oh, look at the opposition, they are hopelessly divided. 12 parties. But in reality, I can tell you, the number of serious parties in Singapore are less than half. It's less than half of that. It's less than half of that. And you are going to see that number surface this coming election. Yeah. I hope I have answered.
I'd love to hear more the specifics, the names, whatever we can't read from Wikipedia or the headlines, who is who, or like how's the Workers' Party in relationship to the rest.
Now, okay, let me say this. You've raised a good point. The Workers' Party, and I think I can say this in all sincerity, is the one party that is outside the group element. Because the Workers' Party, I think, takes the position, look here, we are the only party with seats in Parliament. And so we are distinct. And I think their leader said last year or early this year, look here, you get yourself elected into Parliament and then we will think about working there. Of course, that is not the best scenario because I think Singaporeans who want to see a greater opposition presence or in Parliament would like the Workers' Party to work with the other parties. But that has been the official Workers' Party stance for a long time now. And I'm not sure whether that will change, to be honest with you. You know, the situation in Singapore is very dynamic, it's very fluid. There are a lot of factors at play, those affecting the Workers' Party as well. I do hope Dr. Chee Soon Juan has called out to the Workers' Party to work together. I would like to think that amongst the other parties, even without the Workers' Party, we can come together in a pact in good time for this election. Yeah.
Right,
Hey,
the subject.
Wapao, you just kindly give me 1 minute to type the Lin Jian a bit. Don't forget again. Lin Jian said we need to shift the middle ground, but the PAP is helping us to shift the middle ground with very, silly or stupid policies practically every week. You heard 40,000 private hire drivers, Gojek and Grab, 16% below age of 30. From 1st July this year, they changed the policy. Only 30 and above then can drive. Now, all those who already have the license below 30 is okay, they can keep. But from 1st July, all these young people who cannot get jobs can't even be a Grab or Gojek driver. So they actually literally throwing votes at us with all these stupid policies every week. So breakthrough shall come.
Right, okay, now, a subject which is actually a bit juicy, it's the impact of the family feud. And to what extent, how many votes were lost because of Lee Hsien Loong's wife, and how many votes have the opposition gained because of the intervention of Lee Hsien Loong, the Prime Minister's, Lee Hsien Yang, the Prime Minister's brother? Would that have any impact on the next election?
I think the Prime Minister's private feud is going to be a major factor in the next election. A major factor. Especially amongst the Chinese voters. Because the Chinese have this belief that if you can't even keep harmony within the family, how are you going to be able to govern a country effectively? And I do get that by speaking to Singaporeans. And it is something that a lot of Chinese Singaporeans bring up in their conversation with me. So it must be something that is troubling them. It must be something that is troubling them. I am happy, well, I shouldn't say I'm happy because I believe in acting in the best interests of Singaporeans. But as an opposition, I certainly concur with what Tze Hien has said. I think the PAP are shooting themselves in the foot every day. honestly. That's why sometimes I wish my opposition colleagues were a bit more boyish. Because every time Heng Swee Keat says something, I know it offends Singaporeans. But the PAP will tell you, oh, we are the type of government that takes hard decisions. All right, we tell people the truth, even if it's not nice for them to hear. Go ahead. But the other thing that Singaporeans, I think there are three things that Singaporeans will affect Singaporeans this coming election. One is obviously the family feud. One is immigration. Our immigration has gone horribly wrong. Horribly. Hua Biao alluded to the low-income workers. I tell you, the low-income workers are the ones worst affected by immigration, because it is the low-wage foreign workers who are taking away their jobs. You know. So these two, plus the fact that Singaporeans, I think, finally are fed up and have had enough of incessant price increases the last 4 years. They are taxing Singaporeans on almost everything now. Our electricity has gone up by 25% in 2 years. Water went up by 30%. All right, with no justification. They couldn't even get their story straight. Yeah. At first it was because there was going to be less supply from Malaysia, from Johor. And then, you know, they started to say, oh, we've got to increase prices to make Singaporeans aware of the importance of water. So they couldn't get the story straight. Yeah, I probably have said enough.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, 1 minute. One last question.
I'm new to Singapore politics. I've not been following it. But who's going to be the figurehead of the opposition coalition? Because from Malaysia and Harapan, the whole balance tilted towards Harapan because of Mahathir. The Malays actually, a lot of Malays were very skeptical about this coalition. But until Mahathir was within a coalition, then they believed that it can form an organic government. So in your coalition, your opposition coalition, you must have somebody who can portray that they can take over government and run the government. If not, I don't know whether people are confident to vote for you. Because you know in Malaysia the PH, when Mahathir came in, originally I have a lot of debates with Malay. They said no, you cannot run. But when Mahathir broke away from UMNO and formed Satu and become the leader, I think the balance shifted. So Singapore, there must be somebody who can portray that they can take over government and run the government. Then you will inspire confidence with the voters. That's my question.
I thank you for that point. You know, I think that on that question, the jury is still out. All right. I mean, I will give you the history. When the 7 parties came together in July last year, we agreed, or we tried to hammer out an alliance. And actually, it was suggested that Dr. Tan Cheng Bock lead the alliance. And if you know about Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, he's an ex-PAP MP. He was a PAP MP for 26 years. Dr. Tan subsequently decided against that route and decided to form his own party in January this year. Now, he has recently touched on the subject of a loose coalition again. All right. He has also said that he does not wish to be Prime Minister. So, I think on this, in the next few months, coming nearer to the general elections, if the parties can come together to discuss, I am sure this subject will be brought up again. I'm afraid that at this point in time, I have no answer to your question as to who is our equivalent of Tun Mahathir, you know. Yes, you know, that is an argument that has been made a lot, that in Malaysia they had Tun. The other argument was that Najib's corruption and whatever swung the favor. You know, there are so many theories as to actually what happened in Malaysia. But one thing I would say is this. In Malaysia, the opposition got the messaging absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. They knew what was the feeling on the ground. And I think, other than having this so-called nominal leader of the alliance, I think once the opposition in Singapore get the messaging right, you know, we will be on the way to success. And that has always been the opposition's weakness in the past. They never got the messaging right. And you know, I'll be very honest with you. Our campaigning methods have not changed in 50 years. Every time it comes to campaign season, the opposition will ask themselves, oh, what are the most important issues on people's mind? That is, to me, secondary. Yes, you must understand the issues that affect people, what they are talking about, but you must get your messaging right.
Right. We have a few minutes left, and I think you have monopolized all the rest of the meetings.
Okay.
The family feud will play a very significant part in the breakthrough in the next elections. Why? By the way, the Prime Minister's brother, Lee Hsien Loong, was the first person to donate to my defense fund. Donating, he informed all the media, you know. Okay. In our former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's daughter Lee Wei Ling's last Facebook post, what did she say? Something along the lines that her father was deceived into thinking that the house had been gazetted and therefore cannot be demolished as he had wished. Isn't that a very, very, very serious thing in a family feud? You look at the will. Now all the assets are divided between the three siblings. Only one asset given to one person, and that is the house. But then in the will it says, well, my wish is for this house to be demolished. Isn't that very clear?
Right, your last word is finished. Nasser, you may have the last minute of
my last word
our session.
My last word is only if you are a Singaporean now, right? Okay. If you want to get help, right? You call an ambulance. You know what is the reply from the ambulance operator? Can you pay for the $90? This is the decision to make. How on earth that you are living in Singapore, right? Right? Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, members of the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.